Officially welcome to the discussion on religion and gender-based violence. We hope that this will be a discussion that includes the people in the room as well. I see some people here who are very invested in this discussion and in this topic. And I hope that you will feel free at any point to join the discussion and to give us your input. Our speakers this morning, we're supposed to have had Reverend Bisnoff from the Caribbean Family Planning Affiliation. She's unable to make it, as is Reverend Glasgow Lane of the Holy Trinity Anglican Church. They're both unfortunately unable to make it because of issues that they're experiencing at the moment. We appreciate that they initially intended to speak with us, and we hope that we will get the occasion to have their voices heard, because of course, this discussion is not full unless we have the input of people who are actively practicing, I believe, in a religious space, actively contributing, and who are leaders in that space, who are faith leaders and contributing in that manner. As I mentioned before, my name is Maria Fontenelle, and I work with the Eastern Caribbean Alliance for Diversity and Equality, ECADE, as Director of Communications, which is a big sounding title, but it's not as fancy as it sounds in the NGO space. But I thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that we'll hear your voice during this session. We'll start by me first introducing our speakers. I will introduce each one and ask them to just give us an overview of their perspective on the topic. From there, we'll go into a question and answer. I will ask a few questions of the participants as well. And then we'll go on to the participants themselves. During that time, feeling free to ask questions of our speakers as myself representing the Eastern Caribbean Alliance. And hopefully we'll be able to give you answers and engage in a fruitful discussion. Please hold your questions until the end. Please take a note of them, and then we will deal with them at the end of the discussion. And we appreciate if you do that. Of course, we have the usual just respect for others' opinions. People who will be sharing in the chat, feel free to do so as we speak. But of course, please be respectful language-wise, and also be respectful of people of other people's opinions. Thank you so much. So we will start with off with Binta Ernest. Thank you so much for joining us, Binta. Binta is the Gender Relations Officer at the Department of Gender Affairs in St. Lucia, where she's responsible for developing and executing the National Gender Equality Policy. In this role, she's specifically responsible for gender mainstreaming within the public service. She's a highly skilled development specialist with a combined experience of 10+ years in the fields of international relations and development, community development, human rights, gender, and communications and advocacy. She is passionate about the social impact sector, and over the years has volunteered her time with a number of organizations, both locally and abroad. She currently serves on the board of St. Lucia Planned Parenthood Association and provides pro bono consultancy services to nonprofits through her membership with Impact Consulting, a UK-based organization. Binta is also the founder of a social impact consultancy business, Rights-Based Solutions, where she addresses needs of NGOs and government organizations focused in her areas of expertise. Welcome, Binta, and let me turn the virtual mic over to you.
Okay, then. Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you very much, ECADE, for inviting me to this very, I guess, timely discussion, and thank you to my fellow panelists as well. We all know, okay, gender-based violence is an umbrella term that describes harmful acts directed at an individual or group or individuals based on their gender identity, gender expression, or perceived gender. These acts can include physical, sexual, psychological, emotional, and economic violence waged against individuals. And we should all realize that gender-based violence is a violation of human rights of individuals, and people who experience gender-based violence may suffer from different human rights violations, such as the right to life, the right from torture, freedom from torture, degrading treatment, freedom from discrimination, and the right to safety and security. And we all know globally, the UN estimates that 1 in 3 women actually are victims of gender-based violence. While gender-based violence affects everyone, men, women, people from different ethnic groups, etc., it is predominantly skewed to affect women and girls. And in St. Lucia, while we have no prevalence data in St. Lucia as relates to gender-based violence, we all know that this is our reality as well. And gender-based violence does have some far-reaching consequences for us as a society. It affects the economy as victims may temporarily or permanently exit the workforce. It has lasting mental and psychological impact on victims. It is also cyclical, where children who witness GBV may themselves become perpetrators or are victims, and victims and perpetrators who do not receive the necessary interventions may find themselves in similar situations over their lifetime. And I think for us to tackle the scourge of gender-based violence as a society, we must be brave enough to interrogate our institutions, meaning our churches, our schools, and in the political sphere, interrogate on the people who manage these institutions, as well as interrogate ourselves, for us to dive deep into the how and the why does gender-based violence occurs. And I think my presence here today is a step in this direction. So I thank you all, and I look forward to a fruitful discussion ahead.
Thank you so much, Binta. Yeah, that is a good overview, and I appreciate that you stress that we must interrogate our organizations, because representing the Department of Gender Affairs, that's one of the main organizations when it comes to expanding how we consider what gender, the binary of gender, expanding beyond that binary, and of course helping the public to understand the work that needs to be done and the work that the organization is doing, and pushing the organization, of course, to engage with NGOs, with CSOs, to ensure that their work actually hits all the spots that it should. So we appreciate you being here. So thank you so much. And
thank you.
I hope people are taking notes so that they can ask their questions later. We will now welcome Jessica St. Rose. Jessica is a board member of United and Strong, which is how a lot of us here in this space would know her. She most recently co-founded the Regional Organization for Women in Leadership. This is a more broad-based organization. She's co-founder of 75 with Pride as well, and she works with the National Insurance Corporation. She's not here on behalf of NIC, of course, but noting her expertise and her knowledge in those areas as well. Jessica, thank you for joining us, and we welcome you to just give us a sense of your perspective on the issue of religion and gender-based violence.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me on here. As you can see, I'm at work, so my camera will be on and off in between. Yes, Binta actually said a mouthful, which was really good in the introduction that she gave as it relates to gender-based violence and her expertise as the gender relations officer in the Department of Gender Relations, which is a department that we tend to reach out to a lot, especially in times like this when we have 16 days of activism being recognized across the world, and of course in St. Lucia. And we must note we have seen the effects and what we call victims of gender-based violence across the board, and not only women, but also included as it relates to the LGBTQI community. And this is something that is often overlooked. We don't see statistics when it comes to the LGBTQI community as related to gender-based violence. And this is something that we want to implore and we want to stress on, that we need to do more work around that. And I'm really happy that we have been to here where the discussion can continue as it relates to that. On the side of religion, I just want to point out that it's something that is not really a focus of the religious community. We hear them on the streets, we hear them bringing up discussions about all other issues except when it comes to gender-based violence, and when it comes to victims, and when it comes to access to justice. When NGOs lift up their voices and women lift up their voices, we don't see the various leaders in the religious communities talking about these things. And this is where I think we need to press on and hold these leaders accountable, because at the end of the day, they are leaders in their own rights. And yes, they raise their voices when it comes to other issues. When it comes to issues of gender-based violence and intimate partner violence, we don't hear them. So I'm thankful for this discussion here this morning, this fruitful discussion where we can see, where we could try to build on solutions to address these issues, and not just build on the solutions to address these issues, but see how we can enact and how we can bring the solutions to the various leaders to have these issues come to light. I think that's it for me for now, and I look forward to a discussion. I look forward to sharing what my knowledge and what we can do to help and to bring more awareness to the various issues of intimate partner violence and gender-based violence. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessica. Much appreciated. And Jessica, of course, is coming from the perspective of civil society NGO, which is United and Strong, that focuses a lot on the LGBTQ plus community. Now, the November 25th is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and we look at domestic violence, intimate partner violence, public violence in public spaces, and of course we look at organized state-sponsored violence and violence perpetrated by organizations that include faith-based organizations. Now, I know it's not a way that people normally think of the issue, but we know that a lot of people refer to the source of their perspective on women, on people of different gender identities, and refer very often to biblical principles in that sense. This year, the theme for the 16 Days campaign is Ending Femicide, which speaks directly to women and violence against women in all spheres. And I wanted to know from both of you, how do you link that theme to the work that you do? Ending femicide, which is a femicide or feminicide, I think the different ways of saying it. But in terms of your work, it's been a theme that's a repeated thing because it's the 30th anniversary and they are using that theme over again. How do you relate that work in your, is that something that's an everyday thing, or is that something that there is an additional focus on in those 16 days of activism? How will your organizations and you be dealing with it in your spaces?
Who would go first? I'm going to go first?
Yes, please.
Actually, in the work that we do, the idea, as indicated, women and girls tend to be more disproportionately affected by gender-based violence, by intimate partner violence. St. Lucia doesn't have any prevalence data on that. I think we only have 5 countries within the CARICOM region which has prevalence data on this. So this is something that is actually core to the work that we do. Although I am more supposedly in the policy area, I cannot say that I am intimately involved in GBV, but because of the resources that we lack at gender, I have to be involved in the GBV work as well. Gender, especially in the Caribbean and St. Lucia, is synonymous with gender-based violence and women. So this is actually at the core of what we do at Gender Affairs, because there's a policy section and there's supposed to be the GBV section, whereby there's the Women's Support Center, for example, which provides aid to women who want to seek shelter and away from an environment where they are experiencing gender-based violence. So I see that to end femicide is actually part and parcel of what we do, especially in St. Lucia. I think this year has been the highest recorded number of deaths of women in recorded history for St. Lucia, right? So that is something that is troubling. That's something that is concerning. But in ending GBV, what is actually necessary is that we have to ensure that gender norms, the harmful gender norms, are actually we hone in on these norms and find ways in which we can to just have people rethink what they think about gender. For example, I know Jessica did mention earlier, as it relates to the LGBT community, that we tend to ignore the LGBT community. And I think to an extent that is indeed true. But what we also have to realize that women are not a homogeneous, no group is homogeneous. Women are not a homogeneous group. So even within the group of women and girls, I think, as Jessica currently indicated, what we need to do as well is to dig deeper into the data and see whether or not these women and girls have any relations or affiliations with the LGBT community. So that's something I do take in terms of a point as it relates to inclusion in that sense, as it relates to the data and the data that is lacking. But I do believe that, as I indicated, ending femicide is at the core of what we do at Gender Affairs. There is public policy work and there's also the GBV work. And hopefully in the future, I know for sure, we will be trying to ensure that there is a more seamless process to deal with the victims of GBV under the direction of the Department of Gender Affairs.
Could you speak a little more, Binta, with regards to how your organization works with NGOs generally, and particularly in that area? Because I know organizations that particularly speak to the work with women and women who are survivors of violence and survivors and victims of violence as well, advocating for the people who can't speak for themselves, that they do a lot of work in the public sphere in St. Lucia. How does your department work with these organizations?
Okay, as it relates to that, okay, I'm a newbie to gender, so there may be things that I'm missing out on. I joined in, my field was international relations, human rights, and I just have joined the gender affairs, more or less, components of human rights. Mm-hmm. But as it relates to how we interact with organizations, what I have realized is that there has been, whenever there are particular, I know for sure, forums, we tend to reach out to NGOs and ensure that they are included in whatever activities that the Department of Gender Affairs is spearheading. Case in point, me being on this webinar today is part of that interaction with NGOs, and to ensure that we give the government perspective and the government, government perspective on topics such as gender-based violence. So there is, I think we have also collaborated on certain projects as well as it relates to gender equality project, maybe not gender-based violence, because gender-based violence itself, as indicated, gender-based violence is not just physical violence. You have physical violence, you have economic violence, you have emotional, psychological, and all these things impact victims. Victims can have an impact on their ability to work or not to work, for example. They have health implications. So gender-based violence has implications and has economic implications, has health implications. And we as a department have collaborated with NGOs and with entities to get on certain projects that maybe deal with these areas as well. It doesn't actually specifically state GBV, but it actually would deal with try to mitigate against the negative impact of persons who may actually experience GBV, because as we know, GBV typically affects people from lower income. It affects everybody else. We all know that. Doesn't matter where you're from, but for persons with lower income may have a different experience of GBV as it relates to working, as it relates to access to mental health, etc. So we may, even in areas where we do not actually we partner with NGOs, maybe not on a GBV project per se, but we deal with NGOs on projects which have implications for mitigating against GBV.
Okay, thank you for that. Jessica, in terms of the organizations which you work, particularly United and Strong, can you speak to us about how you interact or interface with organizations? Like the statement, of course, how do you work around the 60 days of activism, incorporating that into your advocacy and into the work that your organization does?
Okay, well, the theme for this year, femicide, ending femicide, as we know, femicide is killing of a woman or girl, particularly by men, on account of their gender. United and Strong, we really try our best to raise a lot of awareness as it relates to that. And I'm really happy that we are able to be part of consultations, be part of forums, be part of, some type of policy making with agencies and government offices, that we can add our voice and be inclusive when it comes to dealing with gender-based violence and intimate partner violence. So that in itself is a plus, knowing that we do have a seat at the table when it comes to that. Again, apart from raising the awareness, we try our best to assist victims. We do a lot of work with Raise Your Voice St. Lucia, who has been doing tremendous work when it comes to assisting victims of gender-based violence. We do have community members who have been affected by gender-based violence. And like Binta said, it's not just about the physical, but it's about the mental, the financial, loss of job, and all of these things. So what we do, we try to work with Raise Your Voice, and we try to put them in housing placements. So if we do have a victim, an LGBTQI person who is affected by this, we usually collaborate with Raise Your Voice, where we could place them in safe housing And this is something that we continue to work and continue to establish for United Nation, where we could find a safe house for persons who are affected in that area. Because what we have found, as much as Raise Your Voice is doing tremendous work and doing amazing work when it comes to that, a lot of the LGBT persons do not necessarily feel comfortable being in those spaces where persons don't even understand their own sexuality, their own gender. So this is something. This is a goal for United and Strong, to have a safe space where we could have house our victims when it comes to that, and also working with the police as well. The police is very important. Working with the police and having them understand the issues that exist, having them understand what we mean by gender, what we mean by sexual orientation, and that intimate partner violence also exists among LGBTQI persons. And more so recently, being part of the new domestic violence bill that was brought forward and that was enacted on International Women's Day on March 8th. So that was the highlight for my organization, being part of this tremendous occasion and knowing that the bill now exists and is very inclusive and is gender neutral. And we're part of this celebration, we're part of this consultation throughout all those years. The bill has been sitting at the AG's office over 22 years, and finally it was enacted after years of being lobbying, of being advocating for that bill to be out there and to be inclusive of the LGBT community. So these are the various ways that we interact and we try to bring some sort of light in ending femicide. Because as you know, St. Lucia, we have had an increase in the murders, especially as it relates to women. We recently lost a nurse who is on the front line being murdered, and that sparked a lot of conversation, a lot of things that we want to see. We want to see change in our communities, in our countries. But what is really being done? NGOs can also only do so much, okay? And this is where we do continue to do, but then we have to also hold our leaders who are at the top accountable to these changes as well. Yes, we want to see the changes, but we can only do so much, and that's where the leaders of the country come in. So yes, we will continue to collaborate with other organizations, collaborate with other NGOs, and see how we can possibly try to end the violence that exists when it comes to women and girls. And up to this morning, I was reading something on Ghost of a Feather's page where I saw sexual violence, over 66 were recorded for between last year, 2021, 66 women and girls who were affected by sexual violence. And that I was like, wow. So we see the numbers are rising. And if the numbers are rising, that means we have a lot more work to do when it comes to women and girls and ending gender-based violence and also ending the femicide. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. And I do wonder whether the numbers are rising, or is it just the prevalence of reporting, which is something that is often debated, whether there are more people reporting at certain times, certain periods, based again on that awareness that people have, not only of how to define gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and other forms of violence that they face, but their awareness of the resources that are available to assist them, their analysis of their risk, especially when it comes to the person who is perpetrating the violence against them. How likely are they to be protected after they have reported? Because reporting is a huge issue. But the reason that a lot of that is just is the topic of interest today is because the church has a really strong, of course, influence in all of these areas. We know that awareness is oftentimes determined by your perspective on an issue. I mean, the church has a huge influence on how we perceive gender, how we perceive sexuality, how we perceive the roles of individuals and their actions in a relationship, including a domestic relationship. We could include against parents and children. Can you speak more directly to what you think the role of religion is in terms of affecting or influencing the violence against individuals of different, who represent their gender differently, including non-binary individuals, trans people, of men and women of trans experience as well, males, feminine males, butch women, individuals who just don't represent what we often think of as the quote-unquote normal way. And what do you think is the role of religion, and even determining for a lot of us what that normality is? What are the rules that pertain to gender and how it is interpreted, and how do we treat people who don't adhere to those rules or who don't meet those restrictions that society places on them? I would like you to speak, especially Jessica. I'll start with you. What role do you think that the church has in setting some of the perspective around gender and the gender construct that we just take as normal?
I think the church has their own unique way of dealing with these issues. I think sometimes the churches don't are afraid to speak out on these things, maybe because they will probably get some backlash. But I think most of the churches as well, they tend to, hold on a second. They tend to, sorry, I was getting a call. They tend to do something what we call, as much as they want to welcome the LGBT community, they want to understand what gender is, they still tend to go by their own norms and their own values and what they believe is right, what is right in their eyes or in the eyes of the Lord, whoever their Lord is. So I think a lot of them tend to not want to openly speak on that, and because of that, they don't want to deal with these issues. And what they will do, they will try to push persons away, persons who probably need the help, who need somebody, because the church is supposed to be a way where you can go to find help, go to seek some sort of, if you want to speak to someone about an issue. But when it comes to these specific issues, it's more difficult for the church to understand and to be open as well, not just understand, but to open to learn and to understand what around gender and around sexual orientation. So I think the church only has its specific way of dealing with it and doesn't want to embrace or doesn't want to be open to learning. And because of that, they tend to push persons away and not welcome persons who are dealing with these issues. Because a lot of the churches, I remember my experience going to church. When I went to a friend of mine, she invited me to church, and then it was like, oh, you're bringing your gay friend to church, I hope she changed her ways. So you see, that's how they don't want to embrace you. They try to push you away instead of understanding the issues that exist, and instead of welcoming you. And there are LGBT persons who are very spiritual, who believe in God and all of that. But because of these circumstances that exist in the church, it pushes the LGBT persons away, and the church is not welcoming, is not open enough to understand the issues and around LGBT, around gender-based violence. And that's just my take on it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. That was a lot. Do you have a contribution, Binta?
First of all, we all know that the church and religion is part of our personal reality as well as an institutional reality. If it's personal, for sure it's entrenched in your values and your general ethos. Institutional, the institutionals are deep and well structured. So I think because they are a part of a personal institutional reality in our society, and the historical context, if we're looking at the Judeo-Christian faith, the historical context in which that religion was actually developed, for sure it's developed in a particular context. It's based on patriarchy. And I think that the church and religion, especially in our part of the world, we still subscribe to that concept, the context in which it was developed, the era, and so I don't think that there's been much progression as it relates to understanding current issues. So I think that's first we have to think of that. And in the church, I think that especially the Judeo-Christian faith, again, violence is normalized. Violence is seen as unjust. Violence is seen as is rewarded in some degree. And when we go down to GBV, we see that in text we have GBV being condoned. Women are given certain concepts or directions as to how they ought to behave, and men are given directions as to how to control their women. And there's even text that actually, when interpreted, it actually is seen as not condoning the lifestyle of the LGBT community. So we have the context in which the religion is developed, and the religion is being slow to change. And in this modern world, we can see the incongruence between the world we live in and that text, which seems to be just a text which hasn't changed that much. So I think this in itself actually perpetuates GBV. And another thing about the church is that I think the church is very, very insular, because the church is, a lot of time GBV occurs and GBV is not even seen as a crime. It is viewed as a sin. So the church sometimes just perpetuates violence, whether it's psychological, economic, within its walls. And this helps the church actually, I think, perpetuate the violence. And even when I think that the outside world, who may have some idea, or the secular world, as you call, may have some idea as to what may be taking place as it relates to GBV within the church, I think there's even sometimes less resistance to even approach the church and actually tell them that they should be doing things differently, because the church in our society holds a lot of power. We all know every politician caught some religious leaders when it comes to during election time. So even though we know something may be going on, there might be a reluctance because we want to ensure that we need politicians to ensure that they maintain power. So I think that there is scripture that is very what we may call outdated, that may not be aligned with the world that we currently live in. And that in itself, I think, is creating or perpetuating GBV. And a lot of people who are victims don't even know that they are victims. Those who are within the parishioners and those who actually attend the church, they don't even know that they are victims, because it is seen in one light. And then on the outside, people who are not in the churches, there's another perspective, because Jessica's point about, hey, you bring your gay friend to church. We also have with women, the purity principle, I call it, whereby if a woman is not acting as pure, what your pure means for a woman, she gets judged. And if if violence is exacted against this particular woman or particular person, it is again justified, because again, violence in general has been justified by religious texts. So I think this is how the church and religion sometimes perpetuates violence, and GBV in particular.
Interestingly enough, depending on how you read it, a lot of the texts in the Bible or other religions, of course, because we speak about the Bible, and just again to set the context,
Interpretation.
We're looking at mostly the current Western interpretation of Christianity, which is the majority, because Catholicism is still the majority religion in St. Lucia, more than 60%. That's followed by Seventh-day Adventists. We have Pentecostal, Evangelicals, Baptists, Rastafaris, of course, Anglicans, Jehovah's Witnesses, Methodists, and of St. Lucia also does include. We've had Hindus, Muslims, Baha'i. We have a very thriving landscape with the meditation, etc. practices. There are a lot of people who also now identify as non-religious. That's around 6% non-religious. We also have people who identify as Muslim and Jewish who live on St. Lucia, some of whom are what we consider, some are naturalized, but some have been born St. Lucians and have a history of ancestry in St. Lucia. So we have like a range. Basically, St. Lucia includes almost every religious denomination that currently exists, almost everyone. But the majority remains Catholic. And if you aren't actively practicing Catholic, that's a question though. We may not be actively practicing, but what have we absorbed from religion? How has religion influenced our perception? We know, for example, when it comes to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer people, or however other terms that we use to describe these people in our in cultures before Western cultures, before European cultures, however they were defined, we know that people are just non-heterosexual individuals who are non-cis, etc. That we know that these individuals will have been incorporated into society in different ways. However, the church oftentimes deals with the binary that also there is a hierarchy, as you and Jessica were just indicating, that oftentimes there's a quote unquote head of the household, and that is often a doorway into allowing abuse to happen, because if you're the head of the household, And if we as a church, another text that is popular is to spread a rod and spoil the child. If we believe in the quote unquote rod of punishment as a way to ensure compliance, and there's a head of a household, of course, the interpretation not always is just implied, but it literally is allowed that the individual who's the head of the household needs to correct the other individuals in the household, including the spouse, who, you know, is often a woman who's considered to be in a lesser position than the man, not being the, of course, if there's a head, then there must be other hierarchies below that, right? And when it comes to LGBTQ plus individuals, we have the famous Leviticus quote that is used to further stigmatize LGBT individuals, and that is done in churches. I know I wish that our members in the religious community would have been here with us, because they would have been able to speak to that and to speak to the current determination of that and how they are in their pulpits and their day-to-day speaking to people about sexuality, speaking to individuals about gender-based violence, not just violence against women, but gender-based violence, which we find that violence against non-heterosexual, non-cis people to be something that is prevalent in St. Lucia. We have a number of murders of what has been unsolved of individuals. We have a number of cases that have been reported of individuals who who don't present in a normative cis way, that have faced violence, including in the public sphere, at school, at work, etc. And I would have liked to have spoken directly to these individuals about how the church themselves are dealing with it. But are there any positives that you are aware of, like actual initiatives being undertaken by the Christian churches in St. Lucia, particularly the Catholic Church, the Catholic, we know the main Christian religions, Catholic, Methodist, the evangelicals, of course. Are you aware of any initiatives that have been undertaken by these churches to interface with violence against women? I see we had Catherine Seeley's in earlier, who is a very strong activist and strong advocate to limit violence against women in the room. And I want to know whether you're aware of any active initiatives by the church, any reaching out, especially with the NGOs that they have done to try to work on the issue of gender-based violence, to expand gender between, explaining it as a male and a female. That's how God created people. And that is, and of course, representing families and cohabitation arrangements as between a male and a female, and marriage as between a male and a female, etc. Any idea or any information on active, or somebody has raised their hand in the chat, and we'll take the question in a bit, but any knowledge of active initiative by the churches in St. Lucia?
Well, for me, I can't speak directly to the church itself, but what I have realized is that a lot of youth groups within the various communities reach out, and they want to have discussions on sexual orientation, on gender identity, and all of that. And most of these youth groups, they stem from the church. They stem from maybe the Seventh Day, the Catholic, and all of that. So I guess we can probably link that back to the church. But again, it's not necessarily coming from probably the parish priest or the head of the Seventh-day Church or something like that, but more so the youth groups within the church that would reach out and want to have these discussions, want to have these presentations, and probably other conversation on gender-based violence as well. But as it relates to the church, off the top of my head, I can't remember or have any interactions or conversations as it relates to that specifically, but through the youth groups within the communities and the churches, we would get that sort of engagement.
Thank you, Jessica. Binta?
Well, similarly, I can say, and since my tenure at Gender, I have not really interacted with faith-based organizations as yet. But recently I was actually reading a 2021 Pew Research Center study, and they were saying that Catholics tend to be a little bit more liberal in the survey that was conducted as it relates to wanting marriage between same-sex couples and having persons of the same sex be part of the congregation. And definitely we can see a difference in the study actually indicated that youth were more likely to want these changes and a little bit more progressive. So we definitely know that to support Jessica's point that youth groups are the ones who are reaching out. So this is actually substantiated by a study, a recent study. Only last year it was done, and it did indicate that the youth are much more likely to want to embrace people from the LGBT community and to want to know about that community, and Catholics seem to be a little bit more progressive in that regard compared to maybe an evangelical religion, faith. So, but I haven't had any interactions, but to me, seeing, although it wasn't done in the Caribbean, because, you know, for sure we have our issues with data in the Caribbean, and even the ideas looking at the intersection between religion and gender-based violence is also very recent as well. So definitely in the Caribbean, and knowing how we are such small knit communities, and the influence of the church and the church in people's lives, people may not be as open to maybe start going in this direction, interrogating our religious institutions as it relates to that. So with lack of data in the Caribbean, that's already in St. Lucia is already a thing, but seeing this research from the Pew Center, which was done in the United States, and it was done with a lot of Black Caribbean, Black African, and Black American. So again, at least our population is in there somewhere. So the psyche of a lot of these people kind of reflects some of our psyche as well. But it's quite promising, and hearing what Jessica has just indicated. So to me, this is also an opening for persons like me who work in gender work, as well as persons from the LGBT community. That can be a gateway in terms of approaching youth organizations and having those discussions with youth, because they're the ones right now you're trying to mold their minds earlier than when they're much older, although we need to approach persons who are much more entrenched and longer, who have been in the church much longer. But in my tenure since I've been here, I have not really had interaction with religious organizations as of yet. But to put that point, I do a lot of community development work, but that's also what I do on the side, but it kind of complements the work that I have been doing in human rights, international relations, and now gender. And I think it is very, very pertinent that when we address, I think, a lot of topics of this nature, I know for sure we expect to see great national change, and sometimes it definitely is much more difficult to achieve on the macro level. But I think it is so very important to start looking at a more microcosmic level. And within the communities, we have institutions, we have churches, we have schools, we have health centers, some of them. And I think it's so very important to start going into these little communities and having the effect on, in smaller areas and smaller groups, so that we can eventually have this change that we would desire on a much more macro level.
Yeah, I see Jessica is co-signing that response and appreciating that response. In the previous discussions that we've had, I think we have kind of gone over that. How is it that the church themselves are? How is it possible for the church to shift perspective? And a lot of the responses were looking at just some of the concepts that are foundational to the church, which is that we should love everybody. That's a foundational concept. How is that being reflected in the treatment of LGBTQ people in the church? The concept that we should love individuals that we don't have things with whom we don't have a lot in common. There was somebody mentioned the fact that Jesus loved Judas. You know, and if Jesus could love Judas, how is it that we cannot extend love and grace to LGBTQ people in the congregation? Looking at how is it that the interpretation of the text have been affected, of course, over several decades by who has been interpreting the text as well, and how have a lot of people, the rejection that people have received from the church and the quote-unquote crimes that the church has committed, how has that influenced how we view the church, how we engage with the church, how LGBT people feel welcome in the church? We have seen, of course, the rise of several churches, more, of course, in developed countries, that are rainbow churches, rainbow in quotes, of course, but churches that are more progressive, that are inclusive, and that come from a perspective of everybody is welcome, particularly non-heterosexual, non-cis people are welcome into the church. And that has slightly shifted some of the more established religions. We see how the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church has come on the record to state that individuals should not be discriminated against because of their sexuality, that people should not be denied the right to a family life, including, of course, parents with their children because of their sexuality or their gender expression or their gender identity. And however, that has not necessarily trickled down in to use that slightly problematic term, that's not actually been translated into what is being preached locally. We found that there was still pronouncements by very high individuals in the church at the level of deacon, etc., archdeacon, etc., that was still in contradiction to what was stated at the level of the Pope in Rome, which should be automatically implemented at all levels. But we found that that is not the case. And there is that link that is missing, which is that link of, I guess, our culture. How much do you think that especially you've been saying in your work from the perspective of human rights, that our identity as African descended people has actually impacted on the interpretations and the manner in which that is translated and transferred to the general public, and how the public themselves now deal with each other on a day-to-day basis in terms of interpreting your existence from a biblical lens and treating and the way that you are treated with, interpreting that as their treatment of you, then their discriminatory treatment of you as being right based on certain religious principles and religious doctrines?
As indicated, we cannot examine religion in our context without looking at the historical context in which the Judeo-Christian faith, because we're mainly Christians, we have some persons who are Rastafarian, that come from the same, and in person we have a small Jewish population as well. We cannot ignore the historical context, and we cannot ignore as people of Afro descent, we cannot ignore our context either. I think that has a major role to play, and if you examine, again, from the same study, you examine people of Afro descent or Africans, people of the diaspora in the United States, persons who come from the diaspora from the Caribbean, as well as Africans, we hold very, very conservative views, some more than others. Africans tend to be much more conservative than Black Americans and Black Caribbean persons, but we should never ignore the context. And I think that's why when I said come to interrogation, I think that most of us, since I said religion is so entrenched in who we are as individuals, because what is expressed in the church or expressed in religion is a reflection of the wider society. So the church is not doing what people in the society don't already think as well. As I said, it's institutional, and there are various institutions, and the church is only just one of these institutions. So it is to divorce our historical context from how we perceive a lot of things. It would be naive of us, and in order for us to do this interrogation, personal or societal and interrogation, we have to be honest with ourselves. And I think that has made it extremely difficult for us to actually, because I think that, for example, violence is condoned in the Bible, violence, and we are over that right now. No one is going to stone anybody or stone any woman for. Let's hope they're not, but I don't think that is something that is condoned, because studies have shown that there is much more of an egalitarian view when it comes to women and men by persons who are in the church. So we as the church has there's so many nuances to the church and religion. So I don't think that every person in the church or every religion is actually wanting to see women as second class or hate LGBT because there are nuances in the church. But we are much more open to be egalitarian between men and women. I think the hurdle that we are facing in the Caribbean is to look at egalitarianism when it comes to the LGBT community and the and persons who are the hetero person. That's a hurdle that we have not passed. We can say we know we don't want to beat women, we are not going to stone women, and interpret the Bible literally. We are going to be over this. But for some reason, we have this hurdle when it comes to, and I think it still boils down to a lot of the toxic gender norms that we have been forwarded and we have been cultured in as people of Afro descent. We still believe that men have to be. We live in a patriarchal society. We live in a macho society. Men have to look a certain way, act a certain way, and women as well. Women who are contrary to what a woman is supposed to look like and dress like and act like. Although we're a little bit more accepting, we still put pause. So I think our history is really, really tied to this, and I don't think it's something that would actually come easily. I think a lot of the especially the terminology and all these new things are coming to people fast and furious, especially with American television, and we have access to this, and there's so many things coming to us fast and furious, and then we end up getting the, we call it the extreme part of it. There's always the extreme part which actually gets airplay on television and in the media, and persons who are maybe might be willing to make changes and might be able to actually start questioning maybe their lack of inclusivity and the hatred that they harbor towards other persons, whether it be women or people in the LGBT community. There is pause because I think a lot of things which are coming to them are also very, very new, and they have no idea and have no time to absorb what it is. So I think it's multifaceted. I think it's not easy. I think that advocacy needs to continue, and it is not an easy path, but to divorce our history from where we are in terms of our perception of religion would be naive of us. So that's something I don't think most of us are willing to actually interrogate. I don't think so. And those who are much more malleable, the youth, and see how we can have a future generation who are a little bit much more accepting of of others in this in society. So I hope I didn't go all around, but I hope some morsel of of information was conveyed.
These were some good insights, actually. And interestingly that you spoke about the younger generation, who there are waves in terms of the younger generation who are more progressive, and then there are many of those who hold on to the quote-unquote traditional beliefs of their grandparents or great-grandparents as well. So we find that is still very prevalent, and many people absorb certain principles without actually even being aware of where the roots of those principles are. And as you said, a reluctance to interrogate as well. That is a huge block, a reluctance to interrogate. We have some questions from the room. Jessica, would you like to add something in regards to the history and culture and the impact of that before we go to questions?
When Binta spoke about having been all of this being difficult, I was just thinking about the way, because we're such a conservative country, or most Caribbean persons we come from a more conservative background, and the way we institutionalize and the way we socialize, it's difficult to break down those barriers and break down those walls in terms of history and religion. And I think when we spoke about, because we grew up that way and because we hold on to the values and of our core values of our grandparents, and we look at politics as well, if we have to bring that in, a lot of us grew up in homes where if it's red, yellow, black, whatever color we grew up in that home, we continue on that generational ladder to carry on that legacy. We don't try to look and understand it for ourselves. We grew up in a home with a yellow home, and then we go on and we say, yes, I'm a yellow, yes, I'm a red. So I think it's again, it's very difficult for us to break down those barriers, not necessarily individually, but I think collectively, the way we socialize is a bit difficult for us to break down. And again, that you can see history repeating itself in everything across the board, in political areas, in the church, in the workplaces, all of these areas, we see how difficult it is because of the way I believe we were socialized and the institutional background that is brought upon us. That makes it difficult for us to break down those barriers. So yes, continuous conversation is to continue happening, and not just conversation, but bringing these conversations into action to see the necessary changes. But again, coming from the conservative norms that we used to, that we brought up into, it's difficult for the older generation to become more liberal. But we see a bit more of the younger generation, the youth coming up now, a bit more open-minded and wanting to explore the ways that we could break down those walls and change history around. Thanks.
It certainly will be historic for us to actually change how people view gender, because there have been so many centuries of information that have been piled on top of the other. Let's have I see both Millie and Alessandra Wong have a question or contribution to make. We did receive a question earlier. We just turned to the room for questions, where somebody indicated, I think in response to a statement from Binta, asking how has the lack of prevalence data affected advocacy around eliminating violence against women and gender-based violence, women and girls and gender-based violence, the fact that we don't have as much data as we'd like. And I would just like to acknowledge Peter Wickham of Cadres in the room, who is one of the most prolific pollsters in the region, the Caribbean region, and who has also been retained by ETAID to do some surveys and polling around attitudes towards LGBTQ plus people. And that question is very relevant as well. How does the lack of data, which we have been trying to increase, how does the lack of data affect advocacy?
Data, we all know we need data. Data actually influences and actually your policy decisions, and ensure your policy is actually sound. You making sure that we don't waste in resources, etc. This is super important. But when it comes to gender-based violence, with the lack of prevalence data in St. Lucia and throughout the wider Caribbean, we know we have the anecdotal evidence. We know that we are living in a society whereby many of us can claim that we have either experienced firsthand or know somebody who's experienced firsthand. And we know sometimes that sometimes justice doesn't actually, people don't get justice for such cases. At times our justice system can be very slow. But I think that our anecdotal evidence speaks volumes. And with the advent of social media, whereby a lot of these things were just maybe kept within households or kept among family and friends, we now have social media creating that national awareness. So we know it's there. We have glaring evidence, though it's not captured in a place where we can actually just go and actually see it's consumable, but we know that based on our everyday experience, and I think that is why we have so many organizations which have been created because of that. And even the lack of data, when around maybe the 1960s and 70s, our second wave of feminism occurred, we knew gender-based violence was an issue. We still didn't have any data. That's why we saw the development of the crisis centers across the Caribbean. We saw, women support shelters, etc. So the anecdotal evidence is alarming. We know it's alarming, and it has actually informed a lot of the things that we've already done in the Caribbean as it relates to gender-based violence in terms of providing the necessary support to victims, but we need to go a step further. And but we need to capture the data in order to make clear cases, in order to inform policy. And this is where we are struggling. And a lot of the times within the Caribbean space and within my space, for example, we do lack the necessary resources. We are not, the social sector is not a sector that sees a lot of resources in it. And that's why we need to rely heavily on the NGO community as well. So hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, that's, I hope I will see in the group that the individual's question has been answered. That was very, very comprehensive as well. It did to a great extent answer the question. And it points again to the fact that we do need more data, but however, we have information. We do need data, but we have information, and we can use that information in different ways as well. Before I go on to Millie and Alexandrina, Jessica, do you have anything to add? Oh, have we lost her? No, she's still there. Okay. So we
No, I'm
will
there.
appreciate.
Oh, sorry. No, I was saying
Yes?
that Vince. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. So what I will do is I will go to Millie. Welcome, Millie. Please pose your question, and then we'll go to Alexandrina.
Not a question, really. I'm really happy to be here and hear all these, you know, the concept of how we can make changes. But I just want to share with you, in the Caribbean, we also have other religions like the Hindus and Muslim, and I know that we speak very broadly about churches, which is more, I think, is Christianity. So as a Hindu person, I will go to the temple and I will dress as me. And the first time the Pandit said, okay, you are very brave. And I didn't take it offensive. And then the other time he said, you're proud. And he allowed me to give...
Before you continue, Billy, could you just identify yourself so that the individuals in the room get a better, could frame your contribution a little better?
Okay, my name is Millie Milton. I'm from Guyana, and I'm the executive director of Proud to be Trans. I'm advocating for trans and non-binary people, also LGBT people rights in my country. That is what I do predominantly. So as I was saying, and then I started, the Pandit asked me if I like to make a small speech one night. And I said yes, and I started with the lotus flower. And with that, the other week I brought in, how can we deal with trauma? And it was well received. And I talk about the importance of the girl child. I talked about community upliftment. So easily I'm integrated gender, sex, and I'm talking about gender-based violence, but I didn't go out fully. And they accepted. Everybody say, you know, it is so well done. You're so intelligent, but I'm hoping that you're getting my message very simply. And these are ways that we can integrate these subjects in our churches. We just have to get our leeway. But I know most times in the Christian fraternity, they have specific persons who will take the pulpit and speak. I was discriminated at my brother resident by a Christian person who is a pastor. And she asked my brother why I am at that prayer service. And he defended me, but defended me in one occasion does not mean holistically he's defending trans women or people of trans experience. So we need a lot of work to be done from us also, because if you wait on government and institution and religious body to make the bold step, it might not happen. So we have to take the rein in our hands and keep going. So that's my takeaway for today. And I'm happy I'm on this meeting. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Millie. And yes, some of the takeaways from that is that you do have to show up as yourself in those spaces. And of course, how you feel comfortable and of course not endangering yourself as well. So it works for you to show up as yourself. And that alone can sometimes open doors to conversation, not necessarily confronting or seeking actively to change people's views, but just showing up as yourself authentically in any space, in a way that you do not, of course, expose yourself to any additional risk and danger. And that could open doors. And we know that the Muslim and Hindu religions have varying perspectives and very, very diverse perspectives, and sometimes a little contrary to some of the Western religions on transgender individuals, as well as LGBT people, other people under the acronym LGBT and Q, of course. And being open to having a discussion, although it could be burdensome sometimes to always be the one to which you come for answers, but showing up as yourself. If you're a person of faith, not letting that discrimination prevent you from engaging with your faith, engaging with your spirituality, engaging with your religion, and being comfortable in the church, that itself could be a way of influencing individuals. Thank you for that, Millie, and for being so strong and persistent in how you show up in the world. And Alexandrina, you're next.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. Broadly speaking, when we keep saying the church, it means every church and every religion. And I am happy for the intervention two of the former speakers made about the Hindu religion. and the other one that spoke about pro-Catholicism in certain spaces. So I think we're treading on dangerous ground when we use the broad brush to say the church. In addition to that, there was a research that was done with ECADE and ARCUS. I don't know if the results were shared in this space because I joined late. That's number one. Another one was done with Caribbean HIV/AIDS with the religious leaders in Antigua and Barbuda. So wherever those are, I'm quite sure it will be of benefit to us all to share. In addition to that, in the wider Caribbean, there is a religious body that is, known as, I think it's the Spiritual Baptist from South America coming this way. Many of the leaders in those churches are members of the LGBT+ community. Already, the church, broadly speaking, and LGBT+ population are already coexisting. Members who choose to can still go to church. They can still take communion or whatever is offered at the rail. So when we're having these discussions, I think we need to pin down and say what it is exactly we are expecting of the universal church, what it is we want to see. If there's already a coexistence between the church and the LGBT population in certain spaces, what is the next step? Are we expecting the church to make a statement and say, we accept LGBT+ people? They already are. We are in churches everywhere. So I need a clearer understanding of what it is that we want. What is in the scripture is what the church will continue to go by. There are spaces where organizations in certain churches have donated food, clothing, and other forms of support to LGBT+ persons. They are the church. They are part of the church. So I need to know infinitively, what is it we are expecting and what is it we are working towards? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Alex. And we did earlier indicate that when we refer to the church, we acknowledge the variety of religions that exist, especially we're talking more or less in the St. context, but generally speaking, it's a profile that's replicated around most of the country except for Ghana, Trinidad, etc. But we spoke about the fact that the Christian Catholic Church is a majority religion in St. Lucia, Catholic Church being the majority, and of course other Christian religions, but including religions such as Rastafari, including Muslims, Hindus. We have individuals who identify as Jews here in St. Lucia, as well as in the region. So we did identify that we were speaking mainly to the Western Christian concept of the church. And the guests that we were supposed to have had today would have spoken in that regard. We do have representatives here from the Global Interfaith Network, Jean Caribbean, as well. We appreciate and welcome their presence, and we welcome any contribution that they have to make. We have a short survey that we're going to give to participants just before you leave, but I see that, and we will have one last question from our guests regarding the question that Alex asked, which is, what are the asks of the church? Meanwhile, I'll take a question or contribution from Peter Wickham. Hi, Peter.
Hey, and thanks for taking the question. No, it was a good conversation, and I want to congratulate the principals for doing it. The response I wanted to give was in relation to the prevalence study, and that caught my interest because we actually did one in Barbados, 2008, I believe, or 2009 was when it was completed. So I'm happy to make it available to anyone, who is interested in seeing what the prevalence study is. But, the response was correct that even without the prevalence study, all it does is it probably confirms several things that you know already. And that was the interesting thing that we found. The Bureau of Gender Affairs did it in Barbados. And after considerable effort, we discovered that the international standard in relation to the prevalence of domestic violence, it was not very different. We found about 1/3 of households in the year preceding had some incident of domestic violence. Domestic violence of a physical nature is invariably man on woman. What we find is that women specialize more in psychological violence. That also came up. The modality is usually a slap without an instrument. That's the most popular approach. And in many instances, people didn't even know it was domestic violence because people just assume that, men hit women. They don't really figure that it is to be considered domestic violence. But all of the other modalities were interesting. The logic and the justification in many instances, and many of the men would have argued that they had the right to deal with their women. And I noticed that you used that phrase earlier. They would say they have the right to deal with their women as they see fit. That was something which was disturbingly present, and it was something that they said that God told them that they could do that. The Bible was clear that man is the head of the household, and that was a real factor. Within the LGBT community, physical violence between lesbians was more common than between gay men, but there wasn't a presence, and even in those days, we found there was a presence of domestic violence even within those types of relationships. And then the other thing I thought was interesting was the peculiar Caribbean non-visiting relationship, where we found that a lot of violence took place outside of the domestic arrangement, because we assume that domestic means at home, but intimate partner violence, which is probably the better term, seems to have been more popular in that a lot of people, you would have a man having 2 or 3 girlfriends and beating all of them. As opposed to a situation where you live in a house and you just particularly beat one person. I'm being casual in saying that, but that is the reality. So I don't know whether you really need to do prevalence studies in the case of St. Lucia, because I think that from what I'm hearing in terms of your analysis, so you guys are pretty much on track, and it's probably only going to confirm something that you know already. And maybe the money is better spent coming up with programs similar to, there was one in Grenada that was really good, where work was done among men who were convicted of abusing women, essentially to try to get them to a stage where they understood the error of their ways. And then they took that program into the schools, where young girls and boys were given classes in which they were taught about how to respect each other. And I think that is perhaps a better way that resources can be spent in terms of programs, especially with young people, getting people to understand how they should relate to one another as distinct from prevalence. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, because again, I do like the repetition that the data just really and truly just confirms much of what is already known. And the difference, again, between when people sometimes find that there are too many terms that are used, but looking at how you differentiate intimate partner violence from domestic violence and why that is necessary. When it comes to dealing with the LGBTQ+ community, it is also important, because domestic violence, when it comes to parents being discriminating against their children, or putting the children out of the house, etc. All of these things are included in domestic violence, but not in intimate partner violence, which shows up differently. As you mentioned, sometimes you look at just the violence between male on female violence, which a lot of, which I wouldn't say a lot of, again, lack of data, but which shows up in the LGBTQ+ community, where a lot of, where not stop saying a lot of, where some couples try to replicate the binary, that patriarchal male, there must be a male rule and a female rule. And we look at female on female violence as being less abhorrent than male on female violence, but it is just as awful, it's just as impactful, it is just as stressful as male on female violence, male on male violence as well, and has been the scapegoat to excuse a lot of violence against gay men, where it is publicly said by the police sometimes, by people in the NGO space, FBO space, that, oh, this must have been a lover's quarrel, which is the first thing that they go to when there's the murder of a gay man. You see it repeated in media reports when a gay man is attacked, or it must have just been his man that beat him up, or his boyfriend. And then it becomes a scapegoat for not dealing with the issue of just the public violence against gay men and the discriminatory way that they're treated in public spaces and the lack of protection from the police and from the state. And they refer to that and say, okay, it's the intimate partner violence. That's the reason. We know it happens. However, that is just a scapegoat that's being used. So the issues are very complicated as well. And we have not even started to touch the tip of the iceberg. Somebody asked how many organizations like United and Strong and ECAID leverage the interest of faith-based youth groups to close the advocacy gap around violence against women and girls in faith and religious spaces. And this conversation is one such way that we are doing that. We had hoped, we did invite and we did get acceptance from individuals who are actively practicing and leaders in faith, in the faith space, but they were not able to attend. We hope to, as we go down the line, have their contribution. We hope these conversations will be replicated across the different islands, the Eastern Caribbean islands that in which ECAID have membership and in which we are legitimized to work. So we hope to see that kind of conversation replicated. The conversation on the coexistence of sex, sexuality, and spirituality, we had different convenings with faith-based organizations among themselves to discuss the issue, with civil society among themselves to discuss the issue, and there were 2 convenings of individuals from the LGBTQ+ community to discuss among themselves how the spirituality or their religion has affected their perspective on sexuality generally and on their sexuality in particular, how it continues to affect and what they would like to see changed going down the road. So in that same vein, I would just like to, I'm going to launch a short survey. I hope you could take some time to quickly answer it. You'll see it on your screens. Just a very, very few short questions that have yes or no answers, just to kind of gauge the temperature in the room as we close up. So go ahead and just put your answers in. You'll see it popping up on your screen. So I'm going to give you a few minutes. So what we are asking is the first question, the first statement: religion has positively shaped how I think about sexuality. And we're just looking at sexuality generally. And then religion has negatively shaped how I think about sexuality. What is your response to that? Yes, no, or somewhat. Religion has shaped how I think, or I think this was properly stated, but religion has shaped how I think about gender is the third question. Yes, no, or somewhat. And gender, we're looking at whether people are, whether the gender is just male, female, gender is more expansive than that, whether gender is linked to how you show up in the world, how you dress, how you act, the role that you play in your family, the role that you play at, in the workspace, in neighbor, the role that you play in society generally as well. We look at all these things around gender. And of course, religion, number 4 is religion actively discourages gender-based violence. Religion actively discourages gender-based violence. Yes, no, somewhat. And number 5, religion can help reduce gender-based violence. And when we say gender-based violence, looking beyond the binary of male-female violence against women concept to just violence that is predicated or to which somebody is subject based on how their gender, how they interpret their gender, and how their gender is interpreted by individuals with whom they come into contact. 5, yeah, and we would like to know if you are active in a religious practice, not a spiritual practice, a religious practice. Do you attend mass on a regular basis? Do you engage with people of a similar faith? Do you pray regularly to the deity that that aligns to whatever faith that you are a part of as well? So I see responses are still coming in. We've had quite a few responses. Okay, I think we have had half of our participants responding. I think that's pretty good because we're coming down to time anyway. So I will close the survey. I will close the poll right now as we have most of the, right, we have, right, more than half of the people, like, yeah, 75% of who's in the room has, or 70% of who's in the room has responded. And cool, there we go. So just a short kind of temperature in the room, survey. We have here, religion has, for the first question, religion has positively shaped how I think about sexuality. 64% say no. Interesting, that religion has not positively shaped how they think about sexuality. 29% say somewhat. Religion has negatively shaped how I think about sexuality. 57% say yes, and 36% say no, 7% say somewhat. Religion has shaped how I think about gender. 36%, that's more evenly spaced. 36% of those of you who responded said, yes, religion has shaped how you think about gender, and 36% say somewhat. Okay, the rest, of course, no. Religion actively discourages gender-based violence. 64% of individuals say no. 29% say somewhat. Question number 5, religion can help reduce gender-based violence. Overwhelmingly, 79% people believe that religion can help reduce gender-based violence. Am I active in a religious practice? 50% of the individuals who answer are not active in religious practice. 21% are active in religious practice, and 29% say they are somewhat active in religious practice. So I would think that the individuals here are capable, they have the background to have an insight into the questions that we asked earlier, because everybody's, unless 29% are somewhat active in their religious practice. And it's interesting that people say that religion can help. Again, 79% of those who responded said religion can help to reduce gender-based violence. And as we end on that note, I see we have a comment from Sharian Walker. After that, we will go back to our guest who will answer the question as to what do we want from faith-based organization and religious leaders? How can they contribute to reducing gender-based violence, and what is it that we'd ask of them in order for them to do so? Shari, can you go ahead? Sharian Walker.
Sure, thanks. Okay, just wanted to make a small contribution as I know time is almost up. In my practice as an attorney, as well as I have a particular interest in data protection and privacy, for me, I wondered if the instances of gender-based violence has been extended to consider revenge porn, as from what I've seen, I see a growing instance of these issues happening, particularly within the region. I'm not sure if persons might be familiar with the cricketer in Trinidad and Tobago, who had been ordered to pay damages in that instance, where he had basically had explicit photographs of a young lady and had more or less threatened to use those photographs against her. In some instances of family law that I've practiced, I've seen where partners, usually male partners, have used some of these explicit images to sort of coerce their partners to stay in the relationship with them, which would, to my mind, form a part of emotional and mental abuse. So I was just wondering if the instances of gender-based violence has now considered revenge porn.
Thank you, Shari. Yes, well, we didn't specifically mention revenge porn. However, Binta did go over quite the different areas that we can, different ways in which violence is perpetrated against somebody in either a domestic or an intimate partner situation, as well as on the broader scale when you look at state violence or violence by different institutions. So we did consider that range, although we didn't specify particularly revenge porn, which I agree with you. That is something, let me tell you, I have 2 grandkids who are now in their teens, and I'm like, if you're going to be putting pictures online, I won't tell them don't, because I mean, you know, but I would say if you put in pictures online, protect yourself by not ensuring that your face is not, or identifying marks not in those photos, and that you trust the people to whom you're sending those pictures, and don't give in to the pressure of you must do these things. But this is just part of our reality. So I think it is, we can consider it to be included in what we deem violence against women or women and girls, or gender-based violence as well. Thank you for identifying that, because that is a serious concern, and it's something that we have on our radar to further explore, as well as an organization that deals with the issue of sexuality and gender as well. So as we end, I shared the survey results. I think we'll see it on the screen as well, and you could take a screenshot of that if you'd like. And as we end, I would just turn the mic back to our 2 guests who have been so wonderful and have shared such wonderful insights with us. And this is going to have had me thinking. There have been some really good insights from both the perspective of Binta, who has been heavily involved in human rights work and is now based in the Department of Gender Affairs, in the government of St. Lucia, from that perspective, as well as from Jessica St. Rose, who also has a long involvement in advocacy and who has also interesting perspective and unique perspectives as an individual who has lived as an out person on St. Lucia for many years. Thank you both so much for being so open with us and sharing your perspective with us. So as we end, the question that one of our participants did state out, but which is the note on which we want to end. What is the ask of religious organizations when we say that when we talk about religion and sexuality and religion and gender-based violence and their contribution to either encouraging, discouraging, or ignoring gender-based violence, extending beyond the binary of male-female relationships? What do you think the churches, and speaking mostly to the Western Christian religion, but all the religions generally who exist on the island, how do you think they can contribute to reducing gender-based violence? And how can non-government organizations and civil society and departments like yours, Binta, how can we work with them to start doing or to continue doing the work to reduce and eventually stop gender-based violence? I think you're muted, right?
Okay. Who, Jessica or me?
Jessica, you want to go ahead?
I started first. All right.
Okay,
thank
Jessica,
you.
go ahead.
All right. You said it right earlier on, Maria. This is a way, what we're doing here right now, this is an excellent way to bring them on board and having those conversations that is needed, especially in a time like this where we recognize 16 days of activism, violence against women, ending femicide. Of course, we would have loved to have religious leaders on this call to hear their perspective, to hear their side, and to learn from them, to see where they're coming from. And I think this is very important. We as an organization, United and Strong, have tried as well to have this type of workshop, have this type of conversation as well. And while one of the religious leaders did agree to attend, unfortunately, he was not able to attend on the day due to some setback. And I don't want to say backlash that he received, but nice enough, he attended. However, he declared that he was not able to speak. So you see, the presence of him being there signifies that there is some sort of progress happening in relation to that. So kudos to the minister, the religious minister, for even attending to have this conversation. I think we could have more interaction, more conversations, and also holding these religious leaders accountable, because like they're leaders in society, and not just raise their voice when it comes to so-and-so homosexuality being the only sin, but also look at crime in general and how it affects the society, and how religion can have a positive impact on the lives of persons. So I think if we look at that holistically, we can, the churches can contribute, the religious leaders can contribute, and also welcoming people into the church, welcoming people and also being open to learning about the issues that exist, learning that persons, the reality is that, yes, it is not just about heterosexuality. There are all types of genders, all types of sexuality, and it's in the church. It's happening in the church, and not hide it in the, not hide it, but open enough to understand that it's happening in the church. There are youth persons in the church, there are elders in the church who are probably living their lives in secret, not being afraid to come out. So I think it's holistical. We have to take it at a holistical point of view, and not just in silos, not just one topic and leaving out the other topic. I think the conversation is to happen across the board, and these are ways we can aid in assisting the ending to gender-based violence. Of course, it's not going to happen today, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but the fact that everyone comes on board, including the church, we can see some sort of progress happening. Yeah, that's just my take. And of course, what the church can do, like they always preach, love everyone. Love everyone. We not respect everyone. I'm not telling you to, okay, this is your belief, I'm not going to take that away from you, but love and respect for everyone. I think that's, if the church can move in that direction, I think we can get somewhere. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. Go ahead, Binta.
Thank you, Jessica. Well, I guess she said quite a lot, so I don't think I need to even give my closing remarks. But definitely, I think the scripture, which imparts values unto us, some people who are members of the church as well as people in society as well. I think the scriptures can definitely be used as a resource, not only as a roadblock. And remember that there is always interpretation. So with interpretation, people may interpret a particular script in a particular way, but as far as somebody, I am not someone who's religious, but as far as I know that Jesus Christ was someone who loved everyone. Everyone came to him and there was no judgment. He loved, he took persons that were rejected, and he was also not afraid to challenge the institutions in the society at that time. So I think that the scripture should be used as a resource to provide strength and empowerment to persons who face domestic violence within society. Studies have shown that women who are victims of domestic violence lean on their faith as for recovery. So the church has a major, and religion has a major role to play. So despite the women who are in the church who experience domestic violence or more gender-based violence, still rely on their faith. So I think using the scripture to provide a source of strength, a source of empowerment for persons who attend churches as well as persons in society, because I think it needs to be preached more on, because now everything a pastor preaches or a religious leader preaches now can go viral. So use your platform to actually send out these messages and speak openly about gender-based violence. Another thing as well, I think what needs to be spoken about is that the insular nature of the church, as I said, very insular, and they deal with a lot of incidents of that nature within themselves. I think they need to see GBV as a crime. It is a crime, it's not a sin. And I'm speaking from the Judeo-Christian faith. This is where, although I'm not practicing, but it's where I'm cultured in the society. So we need to see it as a crime and not a sin. And if it's a crime, the persons within the religious institutions are not able to wholly and solely assist the person who is a victim. Bring in the secular institutions, collaborate with them. I think that the level of suspicion on both ends need to I guess maybe stop, and persons on either end need to start bridging that gap and having the conversations. You will not change people's belief system, but at least we can start seeing that we need to be more tolerant in the society that we live in, because we are not being tolerant of each other. And that's why we are in the situation that we are, where we have one of the highest cases of GBV in the world, in the Caribbean. So that's my closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Binta, and very well said. I think what we need is that partnership of both non-government organizations, the general public, secular organizations, as well as the religious organizations, state institutions, NGOs, etc. But organizations from both sides of the fence to come together and to deal with that, because LGBTQ plus people, women and girls, are a huge part of shaping society. And if they are at risk, of course, then the entire society is destabilized as a result and as a consequence. We know that LGBTQ plus people are at a disproportionate risk for experiencing violence, discrimination, and they have actively been singled out by faith and religious institutions. But these institutions need to understand that they have a responsibility to respect and protect all people, the rights of all people, and that includes LGBTQ plus people. We must respect and protect all people. And that is, I think, the main thing that we're calling on them to do, even if you don't feel that you're in a position to make a positive statement on behalf of sexuality or gender, different people, but you have a responsibility to respect the rights of every individual and not encourage anybody to do otherwise. Meanwhile, I think we have to, as activists, as individuals who are interested, concerned citizens as well, that we must be the change, speak love, act in love, be love, and hope that just by showing up, as Marie said earlier, and modeled herself, by showing up authentically as ourselves in spaces, not necessarily bearing the burden of explaining to everybody and being the one to whom everybody must come for a response to these issues. By just showing up as ourselves, that we can make a huge difference, especially showing up in a positive way, by being there, not forcing our belief system, not forcing ourselves on anybody, but and insisting that we have a right to be. I don't have to roll up on you and tell you that you must be different and treat me differently, but I will let you know when you are wrong in the way that that you have to believe differently, but I will let you know when you are wrong in the way that you treat me or treat anybody else who has the right, just by being human, of being respected and being protected from discrimination and from harm as well. So thank you everybody for showing up, both here and for showing up on the social media. Also, if you are watching this after the fact, thank you so much. This will be shared on YouTube. So I'm speaking to anybody who will be watching this later. Thank you so much for viewing it. Thank you so much for being interested in the topic. We will be having more conversations around these issues, not just publicly, but in closed spaces as well. And we'll be hopefully engaging in different advocacy initiatives with faith-based organizations, with organizations like the Global Interfaith Network, and religious organizations in St. Lucia and in the Eastern Caribbean as well, state institutions like the Gender Affairs, etc., and different government organizations in the region. And we thank you so much just for being willing to listen. That's a start. Goodbye, and I hope everybody have a wonderful week.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Maria. Appreciate being there. Thank you. Thank you again. Great work. Thank you.